Thank you, everyone. I think we have fewer people than a full room, so if anytime you have any questions, you can just stop me, raise your hand, and we can kind of move into a more discussion mode. So today, I'm going to talk about how we're building decentralized social network with IPFS directly, how we are kind of putting a most practical way that we can think of together, and how does that look in real life with real users. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Matters Lab. So the work I'll be talking about here are basically me and my colleagues did in the past 2 or 3 years. So we all know that social media is kind of really important. It's basically why people use internet. The user number of social media is basically the same as the user of internet users. So I think last year we have more than 4 billion social media users. And it's also, basically it's a network that controls how we think, how we reach consensus, how our collective emotion work, and it also shape many geopolitical issues we're facing right now. So it's definitely one of the most important things, or one of the most impactful innovations we have come up with. So when people talk about the issue of social media, there are many issues of that. You have fake news, you have centralized control, you have censorship, you have propaganda, lots of different things, polarizations, etc. Many people have different opinion on the problem, but many people have a similar solution, is that we need to decentralize social media, because social media cannot be controlled by any single entity. It should be something that's a basic right for human. We have the right to talk to another person. We have the right to express our opinion. So fundamentally, social media should be something that's regarded as a public good. It should be something public. And so it should be decentralized without any specific control. And the vision, I think many people, many teams have tried to depict is that it's a network that spans across different applications. People can keep their connections, keep their identities, while they can hop between different applications. So it more or less looks something like this. It's like a public highway. You can go from a point to another. The different stations, the different applications, are different access point, but you do have your data with you, you have your identity with you, and you have your basic rights with you. There's a lot of advantage of this kind of vision, this kind of decentralized social media. Some of them are ideology, like people just own their data and have the right to say anything they want at least at a basic level. But there's also a lot of economic or evolutionary advantage of that, because once you separate the data layer and the application layer, you get a faster iteration of applications, because you kind of break the network effect. There's no one company that control the network. So any application can hop in and make a better UI, UX, makes a better index or recommendation system, so you have fast iterations. You also have a diverse array of discovery and recommendation mechanisms. You can have marketplace for those, so that you don't have the same echo chamber everywhere. So it's not, instead of Twitter's recommendation algorithm controlling how people think, how information is spread, you can have a vastly different way of mechanic designs to kind of determine the value in the network. And it also becomes a better option for the user, because then the user have more options for the application, more options for the recommendation algorithm. And if we have the data controlled and owned by the user, we also have tons of benefit from that. We have portable identity. The user can basically become stickier with their identity. You don't have to change the identity when they hop from different platforms. It also becomes censorship resilient, which in a lot of countries in the world is still a huge problem that we have not been able to solve. So the list goes on and on. So it's definitely something a lot of teams are trying to work on, trying to solve. And I personally think it's the biggest potential impact that any decentralized technology or decentralized network can make, because that's the single thing that everyone uses. If you think about DeFi, there's only like 1% of people in the world who actually actively do finance, but everyone uses social media. Everyone talks to another, to their friends, to their families. So if we think about real-world impact, it's definitely social media. Even if we don't call it social media in the future, some form of social connection, online social connection, has the biggest impact. That's basically shaped collectively who we are. So a lot of teams have been working on this problem, try to come up with new protocols to define how the social graph comes together, how people can talk to each other online, how they define the relationship, and how you financialize those relationships to make the users gain value, gain profit from that process. I'm just listing a few of the projects that have been gaining tractions or attentions in the past. But from our perspective, because at Matters Lab, we're trying to build applications. We're trying to build applications for real users. It's very interesting that from an application perspective, we actually have everything we need already. All the basic components for that vision I just described, for a decentralized social network where you can bring your identity and data with you, and you can transfer among different applications. All the core components we already have. It's basically the internet itself, in a way. Internet was built that way. The original vision of internet was that it's a cross-application network that the same data, same content can be rendered in different clients. So basically for multimedia content that is cross-application, we have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's basically a web app. We just write that every day as developers. For subscription feed, we have RSS, which is not hugely used in a lot of contexts, but for example, podcasters or musicians, that's still their everyday bread and butter. They still use RSS to kind of distribute all the information, whether it's Spotify or iTunes. And for social graph and activity, we also have ActivityPub, which is a W3C standard for how you define your social graph and activities in your social circles. It's also the application, the protocol that drives Mastodon and many other applications. It's also one of the standard that Threads from Meta, when they launched, that they promised to tap in as well. So, but the problem with them is that those standards they started at a time when we have a different understanding about decentralization. We are very much in the world of server-client relationship. When the internet started, in a lot of ways, those are specifications for servers. That's how servers spit up the data and how client can understand that. So the interesting thing about IPFS is that, so when IPFS started in 2016, the most exciting thing to me is that I feel IPFS is the thing that can stitch all these different standards together. Because IPFS has a very sweet spot between content addressing paradigm and also being backward compatible with a lot of servers. So I'll basically show you how in Matters Lab we're using IPFS to stitch together all the existing standards to kind of form a most practical ecosystem for the users. So I'll also talk a little bit about Matters Lab, so just to give you a context of what we're working on and why we need this kind of protocol, why we need a very extremely practical way of thinking about this problem. So one of our biggest applications is called Matters Town. 85% of the users are Chinese-speaking users, which is probably one of the language group that has biggest issue with censorship, which also makes decentralization a huge opportunity in a sense. The rest 15% include like Russian users, Arabic users, also English users, but mostly for the people who are facing serious issues in the current centralized social media. So we have many, for example, journalists or activists publishing longer form of content on Matters Town. So in terms of size, we have more than 100,000 authors, more than 100,000 wallets, and at our peak time, we have more than 6 million monthly readers. So that's kind of the scale we're operating on. And the problem we have seen in many new protocols, social protocols, is that they're still not very good at handling the scale we're operating on. But IPFS is very good in that sense because it's quite mature technology. We have experimented quite a bunch with BitTorrent. And if we combine IPFS with all the existing standards, it's actually a very, very solid starting point for us. So I want to show kind of like a short demo to kind of show you what it looks like. Let me just open my Brave browser. So what you can see here, this is my my personal profile on Matters Town. This just looks like a normal web app. We have a bunch of different type of content, image, articles. You can go to any other articles, and they're just normal articles. They have videos, image, text, everything you can imagine, just like a normal website. But under the hood, it's actually quite different. So if you click on the subscribe number, you can see there is an ENS here. That's my ENS domain. And if we go to the terminal, and so let's try to resolve that. If I try to resolve the ENS, we'll actually get an IPFS hash. And I will actually already get it locally, so just for it to be faster. So if we try to get this package, and let's try open it up. So it's actually just a directory stored on IPNS. You have a lot of subdirectory representing each of the articles. Under that directory, we have quite a bit of the kind of the standard internet way of doing social. For example, we have WebFinger, which is one of the most widely supported standard for identifying identity in a decentralized way. We have about.json LD. If you're familiar with ActivityPub, this is the way you specify a person on ActivityPub. We have index.html, so it's a standard web app that renders out my personal profile. And we have Outbox, which is also part of ActivityPub, and we have RSS XML. So those are all very mature, standard way of describing a person, and we basically dump that onto IPNS and attach the IPNS to ENS domain. What you're seeing in this application is rendered from that data. So we basically render out that data and add a bunch of better styling, basically, for that data. But what's the advantage of that instead of just storing it in a database? We have all the advantage we just described right at our fingertips because all the applications are ready. So, for example, I can go to any of those ENS gateways. This is the use.limo, one of the fastest gateways. And I can just render all my content there. It's a standalone static website. Even all the image, you can see that it's stored inside that directory. So everything is packaged together and transported directly through that limo gateway. Because I'm in Brave now, Brave has a internal local IPFS node. I just typed in my ENS name, so it gets resolved into the IPNS hash under the hood directly. So this content I'm viewing now is entirely local. It's peer-to-peer transported into my browser. And for example, we have another application called Planet. It's a peer-to-peer reader based on IPFS. I can also just type in my ENS domain and have all the content here right under my fingertip at my desktop. So this is extremely helpful if you're living in, for example, in China, or you're living in Iran or in Russia, in a lot of places that certain block site gets blocked, and you can still transfer the data in a peer-to-peer way purely on your local devices. So that's super powerful. I think that's one of the most practical use cases for decentralization, although we talk about decentralization mostly as a human rights issue, data rights, or as an ideology. In, for example, United States or West Europe, it's very hard to find an actual use case for that people just absolutely have to use it. But decentralization in a peer-to-peer sense, it's peer-to-peer so that no one can cut off the connection or the network, is actually hugely valuable in many parts of the world. So we're basically tapping into that market, tapping into how that's useful and valuable in real life. And so this is only referring to storing web app on IPFS. But if we start adding ActivityPub, the social part, it's become even more interesting. So if we go to mastodon.social, the interesting thing is that this is, if you don't know about Mastodon, this is probably one of the biggest social applications outside of Twitter. When people don't really like Twitter, they just basically go to Mastodon. And it's distributed in a federated way, so different servers talk to each other using this standard called ActivityPub. So let's try here, and if I type in my ENS, but with a gateway domain at the end, I can actually view my own profile in Mastodon. So everything is stored on IPFS just as I showed here. Everything's static, stored as a file here. But just because we're using the standard way of telling each other who this person is with WebFinger or the information about this person with ActivityPub, we can actually use a lot of different clients, including Mastodon, one of the biggest, most popular clients, and many other applications to tap into this social network. For the Mastodon users or for ActivityPub users, this is actually turning ActivityPub from a federated protocol into a peer-to-peer protocol, which is actually quite significant because for ActivityPub, the biggest problem of that is not peer-to-peer enough. It has to be tied to server. But with IPNS, we can actually all make that happen. We can turn it into a specification that can be peer-to-peer. So just kind of to wrap up, what we did there is that we're just treating web app as a universal content format. You can store anything with HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, video, image. It's just very mature. It's how the internet works. And we're also treating ActivityPub as a social protocol, but with a twist, because we combine ActivityPub with IPFS and IPNS. We're turning ActivityPub into a peer-to-peer social protocol, kind of just abstracting it away from the server side. And we're using IPFS as a content addressing scheme, and also the IPNS, also Ethereum key pair becomes the identity, because what's controlling their whole content is the key pair used in IPNS or the key pair used in Ethereum key that controls the ENS domain. So if we visualize that, it kind of looks like this. The whole way of resolving this content is that we start from ENS, that's a human readable name, that gets resolved into IPNS, and then that gets resolved in the web app that's rendered in the browser or any other client. The RSS feed, which can be recognized by any, for example, Spotify or iTunes podcasters would use that in the application. It can also be resolved into ActivityPub, so other clients can read that, and then it can further resolve down into any number of subdirectories that has all the same standard web app, RSS feed, etc. in those articles. And each piece of those can be fully dynamic, because each piece of those can be a web app that's fully functioning, fully interactive. So I think to us, the quite interesting question that I kind of also want to present to the few of us who are here is this interesting problem. We already have the component for decentralized social media ecosystem, right? We basically have proved that it works, and it's extremely scalable. We scale that to millions of users. So what's next? Like for that decentralized social media vision, that vision almost started in the beginning of the internet, right? We constantly talk about it a lot. What should we do next to bring that into reality, for more people to be on this social network that's not controlling them, but something that they can control? I'm basically just listing here some of the dilemmas we have seen while we are on this journey. I think it's extremely hard to design an application that fulfills user need. So it doesn't make sense to clone a Twitter in a decentralized way. We have to find a different thing. We have to do something different that's vastly better than Twitter or any social applications for it to work. It's not better in a technology sense. It's better in a user experience sense, also in a human nature sense, so that we allow a better part of humanity basically to surface from that application, better content to come out of it, better consensus to come out of it, and less polarization, less hatred or anxiety driven in the platform. But it's very hard to do that. How do we do that in a way that's still sticky in an economic sense, that people can still want to use that application and someone is still paying for the resources being used to run that? And it's also harder to get sustainable user growth and value production. How do you design a system that can keep growing at least up to a certain point and still producing value in the real world, pumping out good discussions, good consensus, good ideas that is positive in this society? But on the other hand, the reason we're seeing a lot of new protocols coming up, while we know that we already have the standard or components we need, is that it's way easier to raise funds for a new protocol or infrastructure. Even though from an application builder perspective, we have everything we need, it is a better story to tell if you're building a new protocol and new infrastructure. And it's more convincing to say that, hey, I can capture more value in that protocol. I think that's a story, that's a problem that if you're founder, if you try to start a company, you have all faced. I think that's, the problem kind of goes deeper into how the funding structure works currently in startup world or more specifically in Web3 ecosystems. It's a problem I think is very hard to solve. Also a problem I would love to hear any of your opinions on. But that's a problem we have to face if we're trying to scale this ecosystem into real people's hands and lives. So I kind of just want to leave you with kind of the lessons we learned in those journey for the past 5 years, is that this structure is kind of still the most practical way to do a decentralized social application or a decentralized social network. You also have a huge network effect in that because ActivityPub already have more than 10 million users. That's way bigger than the user size we're seeing in Web3 or any of the protocols in Web3. That's probably the most practical way of building an application. And because of the widely supported standards, such as WebFinger or just web application HTML itself, we already have a universal content format. All the browsers are basically clients for that, and we can tap into that system instantly. IPFS is pretty much mature as a content addressing scheme. We can just use that the speed is sometimes not perfect, but we can make it work, basically. And IPNS in Ethereum is also getting mature as a user-facing identity management system. So from a builder's point of view, I can kind of summarize that as a lesson we learned. Although there are still problems, for example, the funding structure that I have mentioned, but this is kind of the lesson we want to share from our past 5 years of experience. So if you're interested in the work we do, interested to know more about what we're building, why are we building this way, or any form of collaboration, you can find me in that email address, or you can visit matterslab.io to see the work we're doing, or for more updated information, you can go on Twitter. There's both a Chinese version and an English version of that. Yeah. Thank you.